Hey, we begin this morning with major news from last night. The Sixers officially announced they parted ways with President of Basketball Operations Daryl Morey. Coach Nick Nurse will reportedly remain with the organization. Former Warriors executive and president of Harris Blitzer Sports Entertainment Bob Myers will lead the search for Morey's replacement. Our John Clark has more about the major change at the top of the Sixers organization.
Bottom line, it is a results-oriented business. When Daryl Morey fired Doc Rivers, he said, yes, one more win would have mattered. One more win would have gotten them to the Eastern Conference Finals. And Daryl Morey is just like all the other Sixers executives and coaches. No one can get this team to the Eastern Conference Finals. Did the trade of Jared McCain weakening this year's team and the chance of going to the Eastern Conference Finals, did that have something to do with this? It's interesting because if Daryl Morey knew he had this year and that's it to get this team over the hump, maybe he doesn't trade Jared McCain for a first-round draft pick, a later first-round draft pick with the Thunder, because that's all about the future. Bottom line is Daryl Morey did a good job of drafting Tyrese Maxey and VJ Edgecombe. Paul George may have been the only move that he had and Paul George had when Paul George came to the Sixers, but the foundation of this organization, it is with Joel Embiid, and Joel Embiid has not been able to get this team over the hump. And the continuing storyline with the Sixers organization, will they have a healthy Joel Embiid? He hasn't been able to stay healthy. He's dominant when healthy, but still this organization, it won't go anywhere unless Joel Embiid is completely healthy and able to play in the playoffs.
All right, John, thank you. Good to see you this morning. Welcome to Sportsnet Central, brought to you by your local Hyundai dealers. I'm Danny Pommells, joined by none other than the Sixers pre- and post-game live host, Amy Fadool. And how about it, Amy? Huge news regarding the Sixers. Maybe not necessarily the most surprising, though, considering how the season ended with a sweep to the Knicks. We heard what John had to say. You've had to talk a lot about this team and what ultimately sealed Morey's fate in your eyes.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can go back to a lot of things, starting with probably the trade deadline and the miscues there. Getting rid of Jared McCain in return for assets that you're unable to really shift into anything that would help this team this season. I think it was pretty well known, and Daryl Morey made it pretty obvious that he was looking to do something at the trade deadline. That didn't come to fruition. So when you see the success that Jared McCain has had, and then you see what happened to the Sixers season, I think that's going to be one of the things. I think there's a couple other moves as far as the contract extension. People are going to look at the length of time you gave to Paul George, the extension to Joel Embiid. They're going to look at that and see how has that helped this team get to where they need to be. They're the only team in the NBA right now, or for next year, I should say, that have three $40 million players. So you're wondering what a general manager or a president of basketball operations is going to be able to do when you're kind of hamstrung a bit by those contracts. So a couple of those things. Now, certainly, Daryl Morey has drafted well. I think you can point to the VJ Edgecombe draft. You can point to Tyrese Maxey, of course. There have been some good kind of forays into that, but that was not enough in the end, especially when you see the way that they were unable to take down the Knicks. They couldn't even get one game against the Knicks. And I think couple that with some of the other issues, especially the trade deadline deal, I think is really what doomed him in the end.
And the way they lost, those 30-point defeats to the Knicks and the Celtics, the building's taken over. I mean, clearly, though, this is Joel Embiid's team. He was unhappy with the way things went with the Jared McCain thing, and then his biting his tongue or whatever it was that he was doing where he wasn't really speaking his mind on how he really felt. Definitely, I think people were paying attention to that and might have led to Morey's departure.
Yeah, that's interesting because it was right before the trade deadline. He was like, don't trade people just to trade people. This is a good team. We need actual players is basically what he said. And he didn't really even mince words around that point. But there's been a lot of talk, and it always happens when a season ends this way, about some, strife in a locker room. That happens in every team. You don't hear about it in the winning teams because they're winning. But when something happens like this, and the way the Sixers season ended, so disappointing at the sweep of the Knicks, I think that there was a lot of things that people are going to look back on and see, what's going on in that locker room. And as the president of basketball operations, you're in charge of the locker room. You're in charge of making sure everything is copacetic. And there was a lot of issues that have come to light and we're going to continue to come to light. But, when you have your players talking about what you should do at the trade deadline, I think that really says a lot about what the standing is.
Yeah, when he wasn't there, when the Sixers lost to the Knicks, were swept, they said he was at the combine,
the draft
scouting
combine,
players. Like, that was the writing on the wall, that he wasn't there for that.
good sign.
He's been there for every step of the way, and all of a sudden he's null and void. But there are a lot of instances, Amy, when an executive gets fired, the organization will clean house to make sure the replacement is able to pick their next head coach. And that's not the case here. Nick Nurse still on board. What do you make of that aspect of all of this as he returns for a fourth season?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are going to look at the outside, and all of those of us that covered the Sixers this year and were with them, all the games. It's hard to blame something like the way the season ended on Nick Nurse squarely. So would he take the fall of something like this? I also go back to how Daryl Morey started here. He came in here. Doc Rivers was the head coach. It was only lasting 1 year. That was the bubble year. Then he brought in his guy. Obviously, the Sixers didn't have any success. They got swept in the bubble year as well. So you wonder if this is kind of like a trial period for Nick Nurse. He certainly acquitted himself quite well when you look at the way that they were able to turn around the Celtics series, the way that he was able to turn the season around. When Tyrese Maxey went down with that finger injury, and then you had Joel Embiid on the shelf and Paul George serving in a suspension, you're thinking, there's the crux of your lineup all out right now.
Yeah.
He really steadied the ship, and they actually won more games than they lost in those 25 games without PG, 13 and 12. And I think that says a lot because Joel Embiid wasn't there for about 20 of those games. Tyrese Maxey wasn't there for 9 of those games, and they still had a winning record. So I think that, as an executive in the front office and the way the ownership group looked at this, they thought, well, Nick Nurse the blame's not going to fall squarely on his shoulders. And I think that that's why Nick Nurse is coming back for his fourth season.
Yeah, coming back from down 3-1 against the Celtics to win that series really saved his job. Former Warriors executive Bob Myers, a part of the group leading the search for Morey's replacement. Amy, are you selling potential candidates on taking this job with the 76ers? How do you, what's the value
What's the
here?
pitch?
Yeah.
Myers was brought here right before the season started. He was actually working in broadcast. He was one of us, but he was a longtime, well-respected, very successul executive, as you mentioned, with the Warriors. He
Several
was brought
championships,
here, in October of 2025. So there was a lot of writing on the wall that he was going to be one of the guys tasked to lead, and he was leading Harris Blitzer as a whole, not just the Sixers as far as having his hands in there, but he has the NBA background. But I think the pitch for the Sixers is that the East is wide open. There is not a dominant team. You're not dealing with OKC. You're not dealing with the Spurs. I think the East is open. I think that you have some – I always have said this, and Jim Lynam and Mark Jackson and I talk about it. There's always movable contracts. People think because non-movable contracts, you're false. Anybody that can move a Bradley Beal contract, there's always a contract out there. So I think the sales point is that you have a championship coach in Nick Nurse that they believe in. They have a roster that they believe in to a certain degree, and that there's plenty of room. There's so many unrestricted free agents on this team. So this would be an opportunity for this executive to come into here and put his stamp on it, improve the bench immediately, improve some of the role players around those stars, and if need be, move off of one of the stars to get a little bit more room in your contract situation.
Yeah, just the first domino to fall this offseason. Amy, thanks for joining us. Daryl Morey took some big swings during his 6 seasons at the helm with the Sixers. Like him or not, Morey lived up to his reputation in that regard. Those moves may not have worked out like he or the Sixers had hoped, but Morey was anything but complacent during his tenure.